Hello and welcome back to The Hatch. I'm Rosie Murphy.
And I'm Sammy Roth, and this is the podcast where we talk about Lost.
Today is an important day, Sammy. Today marks 20 years since the pilot of Lost aired on our televisions.
I was not personally watching Lost at that time. I have to admit I caught up like 2/3 of the way through season 2, but still, 20 years, big deal. And we have got a special interview to commemorate that.
We sure do. And that person is Carlton Cuse, showrunner and executive producer on Lost. He is going to join us to talk about where Lost sits in the television canon. It's 20 years old now, so we can talk about it in that way, and how the medium has changed over the last 2 decades.
If you were a fan of Lost, you probably know all about Carlton. He ran the show right alongside Damon Lindelof, who we had on the podcast twice. You can go back and find those episodes if you haven't heard them before. But today we are going to, for the first time, hear from Carlton.
Let's hear it.
Carlton Cuse, thank you very much for being with us on The Hatch.
Very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, the reason that we're all here is that this weekend marks the 20th anniversary of the pilot of Lost premiering. Can you believe it's been 20 years, Carlton? I don't know what 20 years feels like, but does it feel like it's been that long?
No, it does not feel like 20 years. I'm not sure what 20 years is supposed to feel like either, but it's not what I imagined 20 years should feel like. It feels like it was really just a minute ago.
Yeah, I think that, we're here to talk about how much television has changed since Lost finished up in 2010, and just what the impact of the show has been. But one thing I want to make sure doesn't get lost is that get lost, not a pun, or pun unintended, I should say. But when you started making Lost, it's, as much as things have changed since 2010, television was so different when you started. Lost was really revolutionary at the time.
First of all, I think it's good to do a quick refresher as to what television looked like in 2004. And there were really, the three big networks. There was Fox, which was a new fourth network, and that was the dominant form of television watching. Yes, there was HBO and there was some cable programming, but it was really the vast majority of audiences were watching traditional linear television on the network schedule, on the networks when shows were being aired. In drama, particularly, it was the landscape was dominated by procedurals like CSI and Law and Order and NCIS. There was also a lot of reality television. And what there wasn't in 2004 was there wasn't any binge watching. Netflix was renting movies and sending them in envelopes. There was really no social media. There was, and then there were a lot of sort of unwritten rules that existed in network television that were things that we ended up breaking in Lost, which were, the cast tended to be 6 to 8 characters. You really didn't have anti-heroes on network television. Shows ran until they just dropped dead. Like there was no end dates for television shows. Damon and I really decided that we wanted to make a show that was cool to us. And in sort of doing that, we violated a lot of the rules that you weren't supposed to do, like having a large sprawling cast, having, there was some diversity on television, but I think that, I think helped move the ball in that area. We could have gotten further. Television has gotten further, but we had a diverse cast. We had characters who did really bad things, like kill people who were still sympathetic. But mostly we had this really deep, complicated mythology and highly serialized storytelling and very intentionally ambiguous storytelling, and all those things that kind of we thought were cool, that were supposed to be the death of, television shows, turned out to be the exact reasons why I think Lost became, popular and was embraced by a large audience.
As a fan at the time, it felt like, wow, this is amazing. This is what I was waiting for. Was it scary for you guys as storytellers to make those decisions? When you look back 20 years, do you think, man, we were terrified. We didn't know what we were doing. We thought this might fail, or did it feel easy and natural at the time?
I think that everybody thought Lost was going to fail. And so it really wasn't that big a fear. I don't think, the pilot was kind of amazing, but nobody at the network really felt like they understood where the show was going to go. Um, and I think everybody thought the show was going to be, kind of a quick in and out. But, for Damon and me, I think we were very excited about the idea that the show could be like Twin Peaks, which was, 30 episodes, or The Prisoner, which was 17. And at the time we'd be like, oh, this will be a cool DVD that gets passed around. And yes, it was a short run, but we made a cool show. So, I think what's great is to approach television from this feeling of like, let's just make what we like and not be afraid of failing. And by not being afraid of failing, I think we pushed the parameters of what was, being done on television. And, I will say that, the pilot that I was not involved in with JJ and Damon, was really, there was a guy named Lloyd Braun at ABC who had the idea. He wanted to do a scripted version of Survivor. I don't think he ever imagined that Lost was going to be what it was, but he also, greenlit the show right before he was fired from ABC and sort of pushed out the door and really kind of allowed in a way for the show to be launched in a way that was, really exciting and different. And, we tried to just kind of build on that and continue to, develop the show in ways that were unexpected.
What's really horrifying to think about is it getting canceled after one season and not finding out what's down in the hatch, and that being the last shot of the show.
Well, I think by the time we wrote that, which, again, in network television, also at the time, it was very real time. Like as a showrunner now, I mean, I'm working on a new show for Netflix, and I'll have ended.
That's Pulse, right? The medical show.
Pulse is Netflix's first scripted medical show. I'll have ended up spending 2 years working on 10 episodes, whereas we made 24 episodes the first season of Lost, 23 the second, and I think 22 the third. And so we were writing right ahead. So by the time we got to the hatch, we knew that we had a large audience. We were likely to get renewed. But yes, you're right. That would not have been a happy thing for anybody.
On that note, thinking about the type of television that's been made in the last 20 years, where do you see Lost's influence in the DNA of other shows? You've mentioned anti-heroes, you've mentioned a diverse cast, a big sprawling cast, sort of maybe creators being given that kind of freedom to come up with an idea and run with it. What are some of the ways that you think Lost changed the way we make television?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to preface this by saying that almost any answer to this question will sound incredibly immodest. And I mean, I would like to think that we were at least one of the shows that influenced the way television has changed. And, I think that, certainly there was also very little genre television on networks at the time. So the idea that, science fiction and sort of genre TV could actually find a large audience is something that was great, because I like that kind of shows. I love making genre television. I love watching genre television. So I think increasing the preponderance of genre television is something that I'm very happy about. Highly serialized storytelling is also something that I think people were afraid of, and that became less of a fear. Non-linear storytelling, I think a lot of shows have, one of the things that we talked about, way back in my past, I had been offered the chance to pitch on the original Equalizer show, and I was given this list of rules that you cannot do in an Equalizer episode, and I literally couldn't come up with a pitch that didn't break one of the rules. And so I kind of vowed that, for me, when I was a showrunner, my rule was going to be to try to not have rules. And so I think for Damon and me, we tried to just approach what was the best way to tell any given story. And maybe that involved flash forwards, maybe that involved flashbacks, maybe it involved flash sideways, it involved like the narrative itself dictated the structure. I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about structure and how we were going to execute, for instance, the episode of Constant that we wrote. That was so I think the idea that, writers were free to basically tell stories in the best way they could see fit is something that came into being. The degree to which we were responsible for or not, it's something that I've loved. Obviously, kind of cinematic production values in television. We were really fortunate. There was a guy named Barry Johnson at ABC who was a production executive and then the head of the studio, who really supported us and allowed us to spend money to actually go to Hawaii, shoot the film on 35 millimeter cameras, Technicolor, and be in the jungle. And so it was like we were, when it said, when we wrote Kate and Jack scramble up a muddy embankment in the driving rain, they were actually out in a jungle in the North Shore of Hawaii, scrambling up an embankment in the driving rain and kind of cursing us. But cinematic television is something that's, I think, fantastic, obviously reflected, in shows like Game of Thrones or, Westworld. I mean, many shows have become really wonderful in the way that they're cinematic.
I watched For All Mankind with Sonia Welger, since you mentioned The Constant, and I don't think there's any way a show like that gets made if you didn't do like the pilot of Lost and the incident in some of those big episodes with the production values that they have.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's nice of you to say. I mean, I also think the idea of ending a show having a beginning, middle, and end. I mean, whether it had an influence on him or not, I had a conversation with Vince Gilligan when he was starting Breaking Bad and talking about the virtues of ending the show. And this was an idea that really came from a conversation that Damon and I were lucky enough to have with Stephen King through an interview with Entertainment Weekly, where he was basically saying, hey, you guys should end that thing. And, I think that we had this very fixed amount of mythology. We didn't know how long we had to tell our story. And so it was very complicated to deploy the mythology because we didn't know if it was going to have to last 3 seasons or 9 seasons. Originally, they were like, yeah, we'll end the show after 9 seasons. That was ABC's offer. And, we really stuck to our guns. And at the end of the 3rd season, Damon and I threatened to quit if they didn't give us an end date. And we were able to negotiate an end date. And that was just nothing that had ever happened in television. But like when you watch a show like Breaking Bad, the fact that it has an end date, that it's building to that is just so wonderful and is one of the many reasons that show is so fantastic. I think one of the things that really is the most special about, Lost for me is the fan base, the community around the show. And I had the good fortune of going to Hawaii in April with Michael Cicchino, who played a concert of Lost music with the Honolulu Symphony. And there were like a couple thousand fans of Lost who came in from all over the world. Like 500 of them went out to the church on the North Shore, I heard, where we shot the finale. And there's an incredible community of people who've connected and bonded and become friends, as a result of the show. And I think above and beyond anything else, I think the fact that the show engendered that community is something that, I feel very proud of.
Yeah, I do wonder if today in the sort of hugely fractured streaming landscape, anything can rise to that level of prominence where so many people are engaged with it on such a deep level. I mean, every few years, I think there's a Game of Thrones or something, right, that captures that kind of a mass audience, but it seems quite rare.
It is definitely harder. And I do think that, yes, in other ways, the television landscape has changed, particularly in the last couple of years, as we're going through, as John Landgraf, who runs FX, coined peak TV, where there were 599 scripted shows. It's just overwhelming. Nobody can watch nobody can watch everything that was on television. And it was hard. I think there's something lost in the fractured nature of television viewing where there was the kind of collective communion built around watching certain shows is something that I always loved. And, I think you're right. It's definitely, much harder in this day and age, Rosie, for that to happen. And I miss that.
One thing that I miss a little bit, I mean, you talked about how great it was that you got to set an end date. I miss that this 6 seasons of 24 episodes apiece, or even 16 or 18 episodes apiece. Do you miss that at all? That now we get, 10 or 12 episodes and each season is spaced out 18 months apart? I mean, there was so much good TV back then. And now even with good shows, you get, 10 hours of it if you're lucky every 18 months.
Well, I will say that the other thing that happened is the expansion of the television landscape. It's a little bit like the expansion of sports leagues. So if you have, 30 baseball teams, if you suddenly expanded to 60 baseball teams, you would have the talent would be spread across many fewer shows. So I think in the network era, there was just an incredible groups of writers. And I have to say, while Damon and I get, the lion's share of the credit, I mean, there were some incredible writers who worked on Lost, and many of whom went on to run their own shows. And that aggregation of talent was also something that was really special. And that's kind of what allowed, shows to put out like in a drama show environment, like we put out a new Lost script every 8 days, and it would not have been possible without the collective talent of all the really great writers who worked on our show. And I think the same is true of other shows. And what I miss is the immediacy of it. Like we weren't, like the audience was sort of wondering on Lost whether we were sort of course correcting to their desires, which was hard because we were ahead. We were writing a few episodes ahead, but we weren't writing that many episodes ahead. And so, we could put Michael Emerson in the show and discover that he was amazing and go from sort of having him for 3 episodes and then actually just watching dailies and seeing how good he was to suddenly, writing 8 or 9 episodes. And then that guy becomes a series regular and becomes the center part of the show. You can't do that in sort of a streaming world where you've written the script 6 months ago and you've already sort of planned your weave for the remaining episodes because you aren't going to see dailies for Michael Emerson. So the fact that we were sort of more real time, significantly more real time, was really cool. The other side of that, of course, is the anxiety, pressure, and workload of actually,
Sure.
oh my God, we have to churn a script out we have 6 more days until we have to get this script off the board and, fully buttoned down and send it to Hawaii where it's going to be, prepped and shot. So it's kind of hard when I look back at it to think, oh my God, how did we do that? How did we make so many episodes of the show?
No, I mean, I'm glad you bring up Michael Emerson, who we've had on the podcast a couple of times, and Ben, because one of the things I was thinking about when I was asking the question about just shorter seasons and more space between seasons, I think it would be harder, and tell me if you think I'm wrong, but I feel like it would be harder today to do what you did with the ensemble cast and just sort of just the really strong character development over time with so many characters and all of the flashbacks. I feel like that took having those long seasons and so many seasons. That would be harder today, wouldn't it?
It's much harder because basically it's harder to get around to telling stories for the people who are further down the roster. It was very clear to ABC who the stars of our show were, and they wanted us to emphasize storytelling around those characters. But when you're doing 24 episodes a season, you get to tell broader. You get to go deeper and get to tell stories about characters who might not get an opportunity. Some of the stories, if you're doing 10 episodes or actually more likely 8 episodes, or in some cases 6 episodes of a show. And so you just, there was no way with a shorter order we would have been able to service the full cast of the show.
I'm watching the show. My wife is watching it for the first time right now, and she loves Hurley. And we just watched the first season, and she kept asking me, "When's the first Hurley episode? When are we going to get a first Hurley episode?" And it's episode 18. It's coming. I promise. I promise.
Yeah, and I mean, and it was very exciting for us to deploy that. And we had this idea. Okay, well, Hurley is the lottery winner, and that's going to be such a cool reveal, for the audience. And but it took us a while to get there to do that. And, I really do think that the kind of interactivity with the show, I always think of television as the shows are kind of living, breathing, organic entities. And as a showrunner, you have to listen to your show, and your show is going to tell you a lot about what the show should be. And, like the Michael Emerson example, or watching Hurley's development across the season, or the kind of the arcs for like Sun and Jin, and they became characters very different than the way we originally imagined them, or they were kind of depicted in the pilot. And those things only get done over time, and only get done because you're watching incredible actors do incredible things, and then you get inspired by that as a writer to write to their talents and to write to relationships that are interesting. And we mind all that. It's like, oh, there seems to be great chemistry with Sawyer and Juliet. Like, let's do that. Michael Emerson is this incredibly compelling bad guy. Let's do that. And I think those are things that you just, that you can't really imagine them until you actually see what the performers bring to the table. And it's that collaboration that makes television so fun to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we've talked a lot about things that were possible from 2004 to 2010 that are much more difficult in the current environment. But is there anything for you that feels the opposite way? Anything that you've done on shows you've worked on since then that is a technique or a tool or a norm that has arisen over the last 20 years that you think, I kind of wish I'd gotten to deploy that on Lost?
Well, I mean, certainly language. The scripts of Lost were full of F-bombs, and they were written into the scene descriptions as a way to sort of convey to the directors and the actors the intensity we imagine for scenes. But obviously you can't, the language that we were allowed to use on Lost was very limited by, network protocols.
Mm.
Um, I think like I don't think there was like some version of like where Lost was had a lot more sex or anything like that. That just wasn't really a part of the DNA of the show that much. I will tell you that the thing that I think was such a great part of making Lost in a network environment that is something that was super value was act breaks and the idea of thinking about the show like what's a great teaser because then there's going to be a commercial and then we have to write an act one and then it has to have an exciting act out because there's a commercial and people are going to come back and then we need to have a great ending out. And I think that the structure of having to kind of construct the narrative around these act breaks was something that was really positive. And I think it's harder in a streaming environment where you're not thinking about commercial breaks. The kind of rigor of the internal narrative requirements of that. Also, just the fact that a show had to be 42 minutes and 30 seconds, no matter what. Like,
Yeah.
there's something about those constraints and that actually was I think good creatively for the show.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I wonder, that makes sense to me about the commercial breaks and the structure. Do you think it holds up to viewing on streaming? Because sometimes when you don't have to watch the commercials, it feels weird. Like I've rewatched the finale a couple of times, and the one that always gets me is when Jack is like racing to attack the man in black, aka Locke, on the cliffs at the end. And the break is when he jumps up into the air to come and like slam down, and it cuts. And then like 2 seconds later, it cuts back and he's like, backed up and he's just coming right back down. And I'm like, why is there a cut there?
Well, it doesn't work all the time. Let me just put it that way. I would say in general it was beneficial, but yeah, I mean,
It's different to me
you
when
have
you're
to
watching
struggle.
it.
You have to come up with act breaks. I mean, it's honestly, it feels much worse when I'm watching a show on like Hulu and then suddenly it just randomly cuts to commercial
Oh yeah,
in
that's
like
tough too.
completely abstract place. So,
Yeah,
I
the
guess
algorithm hasn't quite figured that one out yet. For
I'll
AI.
take the jumping through the air and the backup over the random cut. But yeah, I mean, it's the thing is like people sometimes view television in this vacuum, which is, that we're just making these shows free of constraints, but there's enormous constraints, both in terms of delivery, in terms of the money we have to spend. And also, in a show like Lost, the fact that we overall had to make we made 121 episodes of the show, the kind of the yarn ball of mystery just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And that was built into the DNA of having to making a mystery-based show that went for 6 years. So, as we're getting to the end, the idea that somehow we could fully resolve or answer all of those questions, detangle the giant yarn ball was really kind of just practically impossible. So for us, our thought was we'll try to come up with great character endings for the show. And sort of for me, having rewatched the finale recently, I was like, yeah, I think the character stuff really holds up. The stuff going on the island is pretty crazy, but whatever. But the character endings I still find really emotional. And at the end of the day, Lost was a show not about people who are on a deserted island, but sort of lost in their lives and looking for redemption, purpose, and meaning. And we tried to craft an ending that gave us that gave some resolution to that.
Yeah.
Do you care? I guess just, and we've sort of talked about this, but just to wrap it up a little bit, where Lost stands in, I guess, the modern television landscape. I think you have a lot of Lost fans who would say this is the greatest TV drama of all time, or this is the most influential TV show. I know you don't want to toot your own horn too much, so I won't ask you to say or comment on that. But I guess where would you place it? How would you describe the role of Lost in modern television, just if you had to sum it up?
Well, The Sopranos is my favorite show. So that's I would say that for sure. And then probably followed by The Wire. So
I would put The Wire at the top of my list. I have trouble with The Sopranos, but I'll endorse The Wire with you.
Yeah. Like I said, I think I'm very happy that people were so engaged. I love the fact that there's a community of fans that still exists around the show. That's something that is just so kind of powerful and moving and very connected, I think, to the whole kind of idea of the show, which is, like, what are we here for? I mean, if nothing else, to lift each other up and, help each other along the way on our paths of life. And that was something that was thematically very important. And, I'm glad that there were things that we did in the show that gave freedom to other creators to do the same things. And so, I watch a show like Dark or, Westworld or Mr. Robot. And I mean, I'd like to think that there was hopefully some lost influence there, but those shows are super cool because they're breaking rules and doing things that are unexpected. And I think in that way, I'm proud of what we did.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Unfortunately, I have to run off here. I'm sorry that I had a previous commitment, but thank you guys.
That's okay. Totally fine. Do you have 60 more seconds to wrap up, or do you got to go right now?
I'll 30 seconds, but I have to jump on.
Okay, rapid fire. Go, Rosie.
121 episodes of Lost. Do you have a personal favorite?
I would say the end of season 3, where we deployed the flash forward, or the constant. Those two.
Good choices. And for people who want to see what you're doing next, quickly pitch Pulse.
Pulse is Netflix's first scripted medical drama, but it's got a very cool romantic mystery told in flashbacks.
There you go. Lost fans love flashbacks. Carlton, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you guys.
So much.
Really appreciate
All the
it.
best.
Bye-bye.
Wow, I'm so glad Carlton was able to come reflect on 20 years of Lost with us. And what a great choice of favorite episode. I think if I had to pick two, I might also pick season 3 finale and The Constant.
Yeah, hard to argue with The Constant. I know that's a favorite. I think for me, Live Together, Die Alone, and The Incident, seasons 2 and 5,
Yeah.
I'd go with even ahead of Through the Looking Glass. But again, hard to argue too much. Great choices. Just a lovely conversation. As a fan of television and not just Lost, just so many interesting insights and ideas about how TV has changed. I'm so glad we had that discussion.
Yeah, it's weird how nostalgic I feel for things like commercial breaks. But I think his points are very well taken about there is freedom in working within those constraints and knowing, okay, Act 2 is 7 minutes or whatever exactly those constraints look like. You know exactly what you have to build, and therefore you can build it, which one of my silliest but perhaps most deeply held beliefs right now is that the vast majority of movies and a lot of episodes of television are too long. And there's just, everybody could, you and I are both journalists. We both work with editors. We've both done editing. The role of an editor is so important in terms of telling a concise story. And I do, in my heart, miss the 43-minute episode of television because it was concise. You only had room to include not necessarily exclusively plot, but everything had to have a place.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I don't. I like short stuff, and I also like long stuff.
I get it.
I recently went to see Kevin Costner's Horizon, a 3-hour film billed as part 1 of a 4-part film series. The other ones, I'm sure, will also be 3 hours apiece. I enjoyed that very much.
You are also the person who read the many parts of the LBJ biography series.
I have read all 4 of them so far, and I'm eagerly awaiting part 5. I hope Robert Caro finishes in short order. Anyway, thank you very much to Carlton Cuse, and thank you very much to all of our listeners for being with us on this extremely extended journey over the course of Lost for these many years.
As always, we love hearing your thoughts on these conversations. We are still on Twitter at The Hatch Podcast, at facebook.com/The Hatch Podcast. Let us know if you have any thoughts about the past 20 years of the television landscape.
We don't have any particular plans at this moment for more episodes, but that doesn't mean that we'll never be back in your podcast feeds or on YouTube. Let us know if you want to hear from us. You never know.
Thank you so much for listening.
Namaste.